I stood by the doorframe of my grandmother's old living room, holding a chipped teacup like it was a lifeline. The lace curtains swayed gently with the breeze, and everything smelled of lavender and lemon, just like her. It was supposed to be a peaceful gathering, a goodbye, not a battlefield. But then my aunt, always the loudest voice in the room, leaned in close and spat the words that turned my blood cold. "You're not even her real daughter." My fingers tightened around the porcelain. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the family I thought I belonged to, and realized I was standing alone. There were no gasps, no objections, just the silence of complicity. My cousins lowered their gazes, like they'd known. My uncle pretended to read the newspaper. And my mother, the woman who raised me, wasn't even there to defend me. She had died years ago. It was Grandma who held me up since then. She was my anchor, my shield, my only true home. And now, she was gone. And the wolves were circling. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat down on the edge of the couch she used to nap on, and watched as the family that once called me theirs picked through her belongings like vultures. Someone laughed. Someone opened a bottle of wine. And just before the lawyer arrived, my aunt, still simmering, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't get your hopes up. She probably left everything to us. Blood matters." But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandma and I had shared more than soup recipes and bedtime stories. We had shared secrets, quiet, powerful ones, and one of them was about to rewrite everything they thought they knew. The lawyer arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, briefcase in hand, eyes serious behind thick glasses. The room fell silent, not out of respect, but anticipation. You could almost hear the calculations ticking behind every gaze. My aunt straightened her blouse. My cousin crossed his legs like he already owned the place. And me? I stayed on the edge of the couch, teacup now cold in my hands, heart thudding like a quiet drum. I wasn't waiting for money. I was waiting for truth. He opened the briefcase slowly, pulled out a stack of papers, and then paused. "Before we begin," he said, "there's a letter." He pulled out a single envelope, old and yellowed at the edges, with my name handwritten across the front. My name. Not theirs. I heard my aunt suck in a breath. My cousin scoffed, but I didn't move. I just stared at it, that fragile envelope that suddenly felt heavier than anything else in the room. He handed it to me with a nod. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page. No fancy penmanship, no dramatic flourish, just Grandma's handwriting, clear, steady, and full of her voice. "If they ever question who you are," it said, "remind them that love, not blood, built this home. You are mine in every way that matters." That was it. No explanation, no justification, just truth. Quiet, unshakable truth. I folded the letter and looked up. No one said a word. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will. But the air had already shifted. Because in that moment, they realized something they hadn't counted on. I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to beg. And I wasn't going to leave quietly. The lawyer's voice cut through the thick tension like a blade. Per the wishes of the late Margaret Eleanor Hayes, I will now proceed with the reading of her last will and testament. Every chair creaked as bodies leaned forward. My aunt smirked like she already knew what was coming. My cousins exchanged knowing glances. To them, this was a formality, a ritual they believed would end with keys and deeds handed to the real family. But I didn't flinch. I'd already received what mattered most. And yet, I stayed, not for the house, but for what it would represent if it went to me. He read through the sentimental parts first. A necklace for one cousin, a photo album for another. Small things that meant nothing to them but meant everything to Grandma. They nodded impatiently, waiting for the real prize. The estate, the house, the land, That was all they cared about. I saw the hunger in their eyes, the entitlement dressed up in expectation, and then it happened. The lawyer flipped to the final page. His voice didn't falter. The house at 438 Bellevue Lane, along with its contents and adjoining property, shall be passed to my granddaughter, Claire. My name, not theirs. Mine. There was a pause, then chaos. My aunt shot to her feet, face flushed red. "What?" she snapped. "That can't be right. She's adopted. That house is ours." My cousin slammed his hand on the table. Someone muttered about contesting the will. But all I did was look at the lawyer, then back at them, and smiled. Not with arrogance, but quiet clarity. They expected me to fall apart. But I was already rebuilding. Because the house wasn't just walls and windows. It was where I had learned to stand tall, even when others tried to cut me down. And now, it was mine. Not out of revenge, out of love. They screamed over each other, trying to make the lawyer take it back, as if he could erase her words with their outrage. My aunt waved her arms, demanding proof, yelling about family rights. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking around the room, remembering the birthday she hosted for me in this house, the lullabies sung in that corner chair, the smell of cookies that always came from the kitchen after school. They called me not real, but every inch of this house was soaked in memories that were. She never would have done this, my cousin barked. She was confused near the end, remember? This has to be a mistake. But I knew it wasn't. Grandma had been sharp until the very last day. She chose her words carefully, and her choices now, even in death, were bolder than any of them expected. She was manipulated, my aunt added, her voice shrill. Claire probably guilted her into it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The lawyer's face remained neutral, but he raised a brow like he'd heard enough. Mrs. Hayes made these decisions in full legal and mental capacity. Everything was signed, recorded, and witnessed properly. That silenced them, for a second. What they didn't understand was that I didn't fight to be accepted by them anymore. That ended the moment I read her letter. This house, this will, it wasn't revenge. It was recognition. It was my grandmother's final word in a room that never let mine matter. And now that word echoed louder than all their denial, because when blood fails, love remains, and Grandma had loved me in ways they never could. After the shouting faded into muttered threats and awkward silence, the lawyer quietly packed his documents and left the room. One by one, they drifted into different corners of the house, pretending to look for something, but really just avoiding the truth sitting between them. My aunt made a phone call near the stairwell, her voice low and sharp. My cousin disappeared into the kitchen and slammed a few drawers. But I stayed right where I was. I didn't have to move. The house was mine now. Let them feel out of place for once. A part of me wanted to yell, to stand up and say everything I'd swallowed for years. Every dinner where I wasn't invited. Every holiday where they pretended not to see me. Every moment I was reminded, sometimes subtly, sometimes brutally, that I was the extra, the charity case, the one they merely tolerated because Grandma insisted. But I didn't, because real power doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It just exists. And that was enough now. Later that evening, I walked through the hallway barefoot, touching the wallpaper she once let me pick out as a child. In the dining room, the old chandelier swayed gently, casting golden shadows like memories dancing on the walls. This wasn't just a house. It was the only place I was ever made to feel seen. And no matter how hard they tried to erase that, they couldn't undo what was built in silence. Day after day, moment after moment. And maybe that's what scared them most. That I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply stayed. That night, after everyone had finally left, muttering about lawyers and court dates and what Grandma really meant, I stayed behind. The silence in the house wasn't cold anymore. It was soft, familiar. It wrapped around me like her old shawl used to, the one she'd drape over my shoulders when I studied too late. I walked through each room slowly, letting the memories surface without apology. No one could steal them. No one could twist them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged. In the guest room, her perfume still lingered. A mix of rose and something herbal, like the tea she always brewed on rainy afternoons. Her Bible was still on the nightstand, worn and bookmarked. I ran my hand along the edge of her bed and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the house, but for seeing me, for choosing me, when no one else did." The next morning, I found a small locked box tucked inside her sewing cabinet. It wasn't marked. No one else would have known to look there. But I did, because she once told me, "Real things are often hidden where people don't bother searching." Inside was a stack of photos, me as a toddler on her lap, us baking cookies, her brushing my hair before school. Tucked between them was another letter, a shorter one, just 3 lines. "They never understood you because they never tried. But I did, and I was right. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I finally felt whole." 3 days later, the letter arrived, a formal challenge to the will, sent by my aunt's attorney. I could almost hear her smug tone behind the printed words. "We have reason to believe undue influence was involved." I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch, because while they were preparing for war, I was already at peace. Grandma had made her choice, and it wasn't up for debate. Let them dig, argue, threaten. I wouldn't be dragged back into a world that only saw me as an inconvenience to erase. My lawyer, a quiet, thoughtful woman Grandma had trusted for years, told me not to worry. Everything was solid. Witnesses, medical clearance, video documentation. "Your grandmother anticipated this," she said gently. "She made sure it would hold." That was Grandma, always a step ahead, always protecting me, even from beyond the veil of this world. Still, I sat with the letter that night at the kitchen table, staring at the family crest printed at the top of the page. How ironic. They clung to bloodlines like they were badges of worth, and yet failed to understand the one truth Grandma lived by. Character wasn't inherited. It was earned. They wanted a courtroom. They wanted drama. They wanted to drag my name through the dirt, hoping I'd snap. But what they didn't realize is, when you've spent most of your life being dismissed, you learn how to grow in silence. And I had grown far beyond the reach of their pettiness. I wasn't afraid of their lawyers. I wasn't afraid of losing, because I'd already won. While they were busy collecting affidavits and gossip, I was in the backyard pulling weeds. Grandma's roses had started to droop. She always said July heat was brutal on roots unless you cared for them early. So that's what I did. I rose at sunrise, barefoot on the porch steps, and began the slow work of reclaiming the space she'd once nurtured. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because it brought me closer to her. Every petal, every thorn. It reminded me of how she lived, soft but enduring. Word traveled quickly in town. People whispered about the will, the challenge, the scandal. But no one came knocking. No one offered support or demanded explanations. And I was fine with that. I didn't need their validation. Not anymore. Grandma had been my audience all these years, the only one who clapped for my quiet victories. Her absence still ached like a bruise beneath the ribs, but the garden helped. It made the grief breathable. A week later, while trimming the hydrangeas, I found a small ceramic plaque buried under the overgrowth. Faded but legible. It read, planted with love for Claire. My breath caught. I remembered it vaguely. A moment from childhood when we dug in the soil together. I thought she'd tossed the marker long ago. But here it was. Still here. Like her. Always here. The courtroom loomed ahead. I knew it. They were preparing to attack. But I wasn't walking in with rage. I'd carry her letter in my bag, her name in my heart, and her garden under my fingernails. Let them bring fire. I'd respond with roots. The day of the hearing arrived, gray and humid. I wore a plain navy dress, one Grandma had given me for my college graduation. No heels, no makeup, no jewelry, just that dress and the envelope with her letter folded neatly inside my bag. My aunt walked in 10 minutes late, flanked by lawyers in tailored suits. She looked me over like I was a stranger who had stolen something. Maybe I had. Something she never thought I'd claim. A place. A legacy. A truth too strong for denial. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and tension. I sat quietly while they threw words like illegitimate, undue influence, not a rightful heir. Each phrase hit the air like poison, but none of it touched me. Because it wasn't really about me. It was about what I represented. Proof that love could rewrite bloodlines, that someone like Grandma could choose someone like me, and never regret it. When it was my turn, my lawyer didn't posture or raise her voice. She simply played the recording. Grandma, sitting at her desk with her will in front of her, speaking with that soft steadiness everyone underestimated. Claire is my granddaughter. Not by accident, not by obligation, but by love. And that's what matters here. The room was silent when it ended. Even the judge leaned back, thoughtful. My aunt tried to interrupt, claimed manipulation, senility, anything to smear the moment. But her voice cracked. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing the house. Fear of being irrelevant, forgotten, powerless. And maybe that was the real inheritance she didn't expect. The ruling came 2 weeks later in a simple envelope. No grand ceremony, no dramatic courtroom gasp, just paper, black ink, and truth. The will stood, every clause, every word, every wish. The house was legally mine, and the challenge had been dismissed as baseless. I read the letter alone in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through the windows she once cleaned every Saturday morning. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just whispered, "She did it," and let the silence carry the weight of what that meant. Because it wasn't my victory. It was hers. She had fought the hardest battles long before the courtroom. Against whispers. Against tradition. Against the idea that family ends at DNA. And with that signature, with that final declaration, she carved a space for me that no one could erase. A place where I belonged not because I was born into it, but because I was chosen. My aunt never called. Neither did my cousins. But I heard from her lawyer. They'd dropped the matter and wouldn't pursue an appeal. It wasn't worth it, he said. The recording changed everything. But I already knew that. Because in a world that often demands proof to validate love, Grandma had left hers in ink and voice and roses blooming by the window. I sat on the back steps that evening, barefoot, sipping her favorite chamomile blend. The garden rustled gently in the breeze, and I imagined her sitting beside me like she always did, humming some old tune I never learned the name of. I was no longer the outsider, no longer the shadow at the family table. I was the heir, not of wealth, but of everything she stood for. I didn't renovate the house, not in the way people expected. I didn't knock down walls or paint over memories. I left the faded wallpaper in the hallway, the squeaky stair near the landing, the chipped tile in the laundry room where I once spilled orange juice and cried until she held me. I preserved it, not out of nostalgia, but out of reverence. Because this house wasn't a trophy. It was a witness. and it had already been perfect in the only ways that mattered. But I did open the front door more often. I planted fresh lavender along the path. I framed her letter and hung it above the fireplace, so no one could ever walk through this house again without understanding why it mattered, why I mattered. And slowly, quietly, I began to fill the rooms again, with friends who felt like family, with warmth, with music, with light. One day, I hosted a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread and laughter. Someone asked about the photo on the mantel, the one of me as a child, flour on my cheeks, her arms wrapped around me from behind. "That's the woman who raised me," I said simply. "The one who saw me before I knew who I was." No one questioned it. No one needed to. Outside, the garden bloomed brighter than ever. Even the stubborn hydrangeas that never used to thrive had softened and opened. I like to think she had a hand in that, whispering through the soil, reminding me that roots take time. But they always find their way. The house was no longer a battleground. It was sacred ground. And every breath I took within it was proof that I had not just survived. I had inherited something unshakable. It's been a year since the will was read, since the room went quiet, and my name echoed louder than their protests. A year since I stood in that storm of doubt and chose not to run, not to explain, not to break. Sometimes, I still hear her voice in the quiet moments, not in memory, but in presence. Like when the wind pushes through the curtains, or when the kettle whistles just right. She's here, not in spirit, but in the choices she made that still protect me. People still ask, sometimes kindly, sometimes with curiosity wrapped in judgment. "So you weren't really her granddaughter?" And I always smile, not to be polite, but because I know something they don't. I wasn't her granddaughter by blood. I was her granddaughter by intention. And that's stronger than biology. She didn't raise me because she had to. She chose to. Every lunch packed, every scraped knee kissed, every bedtime story repeated until I slept. Those weren't obligations. They were vows. Quiet, unwavering vows. Now, when I walk through this house, I no longer flinch at echoes. I speak into them. I laugh. I hum. I host. The house breathes again, not as a monument to what was taken from her, but as a celebration of what she gave. And every time I open the front door, I do it without hesitation. Because I'm no longer the girl they doubted, the one they tried to erase. I'm the legacy she left behind, not to impress the world, but to remind it that love builds what blood alone cannot. And I'm still here, still standing, still hers. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence.